All right, welcome everyone. This is the first of a series of what I hope will be multiple videos where I talk to primary candidates from recent elections here in Fairfax County about their experience, and particularly candidates who were going up against either an established incumbent or other candidates who had a lot more establishment support in their race. I feel this is sort of an important thing for anyone who wants to learn more about the political process, and especially for progressives who are hoping to do progressive change in the Democratic Party by, running for office against powerful opponents. And this is an important story to tell, regardless of whichever side you happen to be on in the recent primary, in this case, CD11, where Jerry Connolly was challenged by Zeynep Mohseni. And so I brought her here to tell her side of the story. Give her look back on her race and the lessons she learned, hard-won wisdom that she earned, and sort of hear it out and see what we can learn from that. So Zeynep, feel free to introduce yourself, and thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much, Jeff, for allowing me to tell my side of the story. As you said, I'm Zeynep Mohseni. I just ran a campaign in CD11 to get the Democratic nomination from the left. So I support a lot of policy platforms that is not supported by the incumbent. So I am fully for Medicare for all, the Green New Deal, a livable minimum wage. I'm very strong on immigrant rights. I believe in educational equity, and I want to expand, as part of racial justice and equity, the Voting Rights and Civil Rights Act. So those were some of the main ideologies that I carried in with myself to as a candidate, and I ran with no establishment support at all. If anything, zero. Yes. If anything, I faced a lot of hostility when I was part of the, when I went to participate, sort of to introduce myself and tell people that I was running in hopes to get the Democratic nomination within the local Democratic Party. A lot of pushback. A lot of people didn't like the idea of somebody coming in to say that they weren't aligned in values with the person that they were aligned with, which would be Representative Connolly. And I got not only pushback in the sense that a lot of people were hesitant to talk to me, and I think that, Jeff, you're one of the only people who actually would talk to me. So I think that this hostility, very visible. I think that I was at one of the holiday parties, and somebody, Jerry Connolly, was coming to speak, and somebody was physically blocking me from going up to him to say hi, when I just maneuvered myself into the
You're so dangerous looking.
I'm so dangerous looking. So I think that a lot of people refused to sign the petition. You're required to submit 1,000 signatures for federal offices to get your name on the ballot. A lot of people flat out refused to sign my petition. So the process within the local Democratic Party felt very undemocratic to me. I think that something that you, talk about a lot is the primaries are democratic, and not only that we are a democratic country, but we are the Democratic Party. So I felt like it was not very democratic.
Yeah, we can always be doing better, and the most basic thing we can do is to be careful in how we deal with and welcome challengers for our incumbent seats. And primaries don't have to be combative and contentious or mean-spirited. Sometimes they will have strong emotions, without a doubt. But it's always going to be a fine line in how you walk. People love their incumbent, or people love the challenger. It's the nature of the game. But the people who are challengers, often as not, will be people you probably still want involved in the Democratic Party going forward. Even if maybe you don't want them to unseat your friend who's in office, there are other places that the experience they gain can be used in other places. It can be used against a Republican candidate defending or attacking. And it is, from my practical point of view, just wasteful to drive these people out just because they have the temerity to challenge the person you like.
I think that I was very thoughtful about how I wanted to go. There are a lot of fundamental values that are different between me and Connolly. I think one of them, I have a very strong feeling about campaign finance laws. And I think that representatives, people who are in politics or hold the power to make decisions about the general public's life should not have financial incentive for their decision to sway one way or another. So campaign financing, so political donations is something that I felt very strongly about. And Connolly takes money from ICE contractors. And I think that to a lot of people, that's a non-issue.
Yeah.
And I think that as a district 11 is over 30% immigrant. And I think that a lot of us have immigrant stories or immigrant ourselves or have family members who are immigrants. These things matter. Whereas the local Democratic Party is not representative of the district of itself, of not the county either. Fairfax County is about 52% white and like I want to say 80% white in the local Democratic Party. It's older, white, upper middle class people. So I think that
people at the time.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you
Oh, sorry, no, I was jumping in. Yeah, I was just going to back you up by saying it's traditionally people who have the time, the energy, and the support to do that, which unfortunately prejudices it in certain directions. Like not, it's something we have to intentionally work our way around.
Absolutely. And I think that when I came in with this like very strong racial justice focus, I think a lot of people were taken aback by that. And I have been very vocal in the sense of pointing out that when you have so many people coming from, if not the exact same, but very similar racial and socioeconomic background, it just becomes this echo chamber. A lot of people had such strong affinity to Representative Connolly's because they're friends, because they have known them for years. But I think that does not qualify you as a candidate, right? So I think that a lot of people took it very personally, as if I was attacking their friend, or as if I was somehow going against their person. But I think that, like I said, I was very intentional about how I brought those issues in, because I recognize that despite the fact that this is a very Democratic seat, I did not want to give ammunition to the Republican challenger for these points to be brought up. And like as recent as today, there was a House bill or resolution on the floor up for vote to cut the military budget by 10%, to have it go, the cut to go to healthcare, housing, education, and Jerry Connolly voted no. So I think that despite the fact that he calls himself progressive, and I think that those things matter. You cannot be having a social justice movement going on in our home country, but then we're also funding the military industrial complex, sending lower income people of color to go abroad and kill Black and brown people. So I think that those are caveats that a lot of people aren't impacted by those issues, so it's a non-issue for them. Whereas, so it felt to a lot of people that I was coming out of nowhere. And I think that because I felt I got a lot of pushback, I didn't have the opportunity to explain myself. And obviously COVID didn't help anybody.
We definitely needed to cover that.
Yeah. So that was like, so I think that, yes, you may have personal feelings, personal relationships, but I think at the end of the day, it comes down to like policy and values and morals.
And it's discussions that we need to be having. Like we can't just sidestep them or ignore them. It will come back to bite us. It will leave us with important vulnerabilities. It will drive potential voters away. It will drive potential candidates away. It will weaken us as a party. We need to be having these discussions and preferably at a time when people are willing to engage in it from both sides in a nicer way. Because if you don't do it during that window of opportunity, when it comes back, it will be in a less nice way.
Right. Like, I think that the disproportionate, like, police brutality against Black people, I think that I'm very, like, grateful for the social justice movement that's happening in terms of racial justice. But I think that these conversations could have been had when Ferguson happened, or before Ferguson happened, before like so many Black people were murdered. So I think that we have these opportunities, but there are not a lot of conversations because I think people are comfortable in how they are and how their lifestyles are, that
Mhm.
until it becomes to a point where it's no longer bearable by these communities who are being oppressed, that it gets attention.
Right.
But I agree. I think that these conversations are important and they need to be had and constantly be had for us to be a better, equitable society.
Hmm. Absolutely. So that's sort of the, what do I say, the moral imperative behind a good primary system. Let's dive in a little bit more about some of the practical fundamentals of what you went through. Like obviously, as you said, there was what you might call the sort of emotional obstacles of people just
Right.
being like, ooh, not, don't go after Jerry.
Right.
Go after imaginary dino that lives in my head that is way worse than him,
Right.
who just doesn't happen to be on the ballot this year.
Right.
Yeah. So if you had to go back through and say like, what, obviously you can list some of the practical limitations that you
Mhm.
had as a first time candidate and going up against the advantages he had. And also what sort of things would you like to see in the future that could help with that, or
Mhm.
that could make a more even playing field?
So I think some of the practical things. So before I started campaigning, I went to before I announced, there are a lot of logistical things that go into a campaign, like building a website. They call this kitchen cabinet, having people advise you as to what your issues are, or like how to frame your issues to make it concise and deliverable.
Hmm.
You have to set up a ActBlue account, a email account, so all these very small things that add up and can be very time consuming. So I did some of that. So I started doing talking to community members. I wanted to be very intentional about having a community centered campaign. So
Hmm.
even before I announced, I spoke with a lot of community members, a lot of community leaders, people who are usually not present at some place like FCDC. So I
Mm-hmm.
talked to people, and I think there was this fear of retaliation. Like, if we as community leaders come out in full support of you, that we will be blacklisted from this and from certain events, from certain privileges that they get. So I
Mm.
didn't get, a lot of people felt that there's a need for change, but a lot of people didn't have the resources to be able to support that change, which would be a more progressive agenda like mine.
Sure.
So I talked to a lot of community members, and I think my advice to whoever will be challenging somebody in the primary, I think that empathy is something that is like a given. You should have, especially people who don't have similar experiences as you. So I met with a lot of community leaders in the LGBTQ plus community, a lot of people. I have a lot of my own personal story of being an immigrant, being a refugee, but there are a lot of people who have a different immigrant story.
Hmm.
So I met with a lot of like immigrant justice organizations. I did some trainings. I didn't have a lot of money to do a lot of really fancy trainings. So I did what
Yeah.
trainings would either offer scholarships, or they would were cheaper. So PCCC, which is the Progressive Change Campaign Committee, does a week-long training to talk to you about how to run a campaign. I did a training with them. I did a training called We Lead through American University. It's catered to women who want
Hmm.
to run for office or work in the political arena. I did that. I did some trainings with, I'm an organizer, I'm like a community organizer. So I did some organizing training as to how to be politically active. So those were some of the trainings that I took.
Sure.
I also, like I said before, I'm have very strong feelings about campaign finance laws. In the beginning of my candidacy, I signed a pledge not to take any corporate PAC money, or not that anybody was offering it, just to clarify. I don't think I was
Dominion
clear.
wasn't beating down your door.
No,
It's
I
coming
think
right
that,
out of the wall socket.
right.
Take our money.
Yeah, they're like, Green New Deal, we're so behind it. Here's our money. So nobody was offering it, but I wanted to. And then, so I wanted to also have very strong feeling about data privacy. So organizations that sell lists of donors and stuff like that, I wanted to research to make sure that, first of all, these people consented to be on these lists. And then second of all, like, where are they getting their data? So it took me a really long time to build that base of like, these are the people I want to ask for money. Also, asking for money, I didn't want to run a campaign where most of my campaign, which is true to a lot of candidates, that they spend most of the time calling people to ask for money. And I wanted to be very intentional about not doing that. And also COVID hit, and it felt very icky for me to call somebody to ask for $1,000 when I volunteer with a food delivery service that sends me to these houses where people don't have food to eat. It felt just so inhumane for me to say, I'm running, give me money, when I know there's such a huge need otherwise. So those are also some of the logistical things that I feel like if I could go back, I would start early to get a solid base of. And then people who have the capability to donate big sums of money to political candidates also come with big agenda items for you. So I think that I wanted to be intentional about not compromising about what my message was and how I felt. And I think it takes, because it happens very conversationally, and I think people slide in certain things that you have to be very cognizant of as a candidate of what you want to compromise or not. So a lot of people didn't like Medicare for all. So people wanted to be like, how about like Medicare for all who want it? And I'm not about that. So it's a very Pete Buttigieg messaging. So I didn't, so it took me a while to set up this base of donor. A lot of in district donors are already people who support Jerry Connolly or have some sort of relationship with him, or don't like the idea of a brown woman representing this area. So very overtly. So they didn't support me. So I started working with an organization called Grassroots Analytics. I checked in with a lot of other progressive candidates who were using this service to ask them what their thoughts were about it. I had read an article about how there was some questions about where they get their data. I wanted to make sure it was legal, it was moral. So
you did a lot of good research, it sounds like.
I wanted to be very thoughtful about running a community centered. I wanted to live, I feel like there's this sentiment that politicians tend to do whatever it takes to win, and I wanted to hold on to my moral values because that's how I came into the sphere and the arena, and I wanted to hold on to my values. And if something, it took me a really long time to find the right bank. So to find the lesser of evil banks to bank with, because for example, Wells Fargo is a bank that continuously has lawsuits brought up against it because it discriminates specifically against Black people and brown people in terms of giving them high interest rates, in terms of like overcharging them and things like that. So I wanted to do research to make sure that every institution, every organization that I connect with has the same values that I do. So we ended up with going with TD Bank, even though TD Bank is like also a bank, but it's like the lesser of the banks that I could find. So yeah, I wanted to be very thoughtful about how I conducted business.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, that's great. And yeah, they just made sure to quickly pull up on VPAP. Over the course of the campaign, I think one of the great great visual examples of the sort of David and Goliath aspect of these races, Jerry ended up spending, what was the exact number? I had it right here. He spent a little over $1 million.
So as of the last filing, he spent $1 million, 40,000, which my entire fundraising budget was $29,000.
Yes, yeah, I was going to get to that part. I was like, let's start with the huge honking number, and then like
Right. Sorry, please go ahead.
No, yeah, and that's, I mean, there's always the question of like, what does that all go into? Like, and are there expenses that the big campaigns, that the incumbent campaign are going to have? Paying big name consultants, theoretically, or whatever, or like that extra mailer, and like, there's always the question of like, how effective are all these things? And certainly, I hope to talk more at length going forward in a lot of these interviews and other occasions about, what are the good chunks of money that seem to be like the most effective injections into a campaign. But that's a whole other discussion. But yeah, so like, you have $20,000 to throw around to do all the things a campaign might want to do, and your opponent has several orders of magnitude beyond that.
Yeah, so I knew going into the campaign that Jerry had, I think at all times, $3 million cash on hand. And he continuously fundraises for that. And I think that, like I said, having these strong feelings about campaign finance reform and campaign finances in general, and then also being realistic as to what we can do with this sum of money that I have. So I will talk about what we did, and especially somebody who's running a campaign for the first time. There are a lot of costs that are necessities, like everything costs money. So the VPN, your web name costs money, your website costs money to build it, to maintain it. The email address that you use costs money. A phone costs money. If you get an office space, that costs money. So there are a lot of things that you cannot function without, which is these like basic things. I didn't have the financial capability to have really brand name political consultants. Even if I did have the financial capability, I don't think I would have gone to financial consultants, because I think there's a detachment of what the general public feels are important issues compared to political consultants. I wouldn't go to them anyway. But so the mailers, so throughout the campaign, I didn't have the financial capability to send out mailers to people, whereas Jerry Connolly was able to send, I think about 7 for sure mailers throughout the campaign, but probably more than that. He was able to buy data to send every person in the district who had requested a mail-in ballot. He was able to buy their data and then send them individualized letters asking for their vote. He also had the money to kind of mass print a pre-filled request for people's mail-in ballots. And I didn't have the money to do that. And that shows in terms of the lapse. When they counted the in-person voting, I got 30% of the votes. And then when they counted the mail-in ballots, our gap got bigger, because he had the money to spend to let people know that he was running, and often made it sound like he was the only one running, which is kind of counterintuitive for him to spend, like people would. But I think so is our system. It's set up in a way that voters aren't kept in the loop. There's not a lot of information going out to voters to let them know that there's an election, first of all, and that who's on the ballot, what their values are. So I think that's where money plays a stronger role. And I think that also is reflective. We had volunteers cover certain precincts, and every precinct where we had a couple volunteers present, we either won the precinct or we got a lot of votes, because people resonate with the message that I have. A lot of people are really hungry for change, but then because I don't have the financial capability to send out my issues to people's doors, and COVID happens, I could knock on people's doors, kind of set me back a lot more than it would have. I didn't get the opportunity to debate Jerry Connolly. Our campaign personally didn't send out an invite, but I was invited to a forum where he declined to be present, which is also very undemocratic. I think that I just don't understand how somebody could represent over 800,000 people in a district and then never have to debate, never have to justify why they should be in office, other than the fact that they have $3 million and they can send money or mailers.
Money comes in handy.
It does.
It opens up a few things.
You know.
Yeah. It's not everything. We certainly have some very recent
Absolutely.
examples. The Board of Supervisor chairman race certainly had examples where you can throw $1 million at a problem and it doesn't work. And I hope to talk with him at some point.
Yeah.
Um, you know, it's about all the things you could bring to bring to bear. If you have a good candidate with a good message and you're smart about what you do, having money really helps you take off. Whereas if you are missing some of those elements, it
Right.
just gets exponentially harder.
Right. I think one thing was just we had a lot of people who had political campaign experience. My entire staff, including myself, were volunteers. My campaign manager and I had both full-time jobs, and we worked on the campaign alongside that. And I think that there are a lot of people who felt very passionate about change, about wanting to advocate for policies that are at least a step toward a more equitable society.
Yeah.
And there were people who were working simultaneously on other campaigns as they were with our campaigns. So I think that what we didn't have the money to hire in terms of like political consultancy, we were able to make up by having people who just believe in our message. So I think having a strong base of support from your volunteers, from your staff, is incredibly important. And another logistical thing is that in the beginning, it took a lot of people, you and I met a bunch of times just to talk about, I think you are, I want to say, one of 3 people who were willing to meet with me, period, to kind of discuss in terms of what progress was happening, who were willing to tap into their own network to let people know about our message and let people know that there was a race, and if people wanted to, they could volunteer with us. So getting a base team of people who you can rely on is incredibly hard, but it happened for us. Once our campaign picked up a little bit more, we were able to get, at the end of the campaign, we had about 125 to 130 people who were there consistently. So I think that having a strong support from your staff is like lifesaver.
Yeah. And you know, for someone taking on such, I mean, Jerry Connolly is probably one of the strongestly backed up, entrenched politicians in our area that's not a complete state level official. Like he punches very high in his weight class. And you did a good job of getting a respectable showing with all the obstacles you had to face. So I mean,
Thank you.
It is something that should give other challengers hope and should be something that we all should learn from. Like things you did well, the things that need to be hopefully fixed. And that's kind of what I'm hoping to do with my organization, is like some of the things you talked about, the money, like when, you know, challengers, when can they start, you know, fundraising, you know, is how helpful is it to them to have a pot of money that's ready to go as soon as they're ready to go? And when can they start planning and training ahead of time, and all the things they have to do, they have to get started themselves. And the more connected you are, the easier that is. So in essence, by having all those hurdles for you to jump over to even get going to take on someone, it pushes out more and more people who may have the right ideas, may be personally charismatic, may have some organizational smarts in a lot of ways, but like it really prejudices it towards the people who already have a lot of those things in place, and it makes it a much smaller pool of folks who can compete politically. And that's always going to be a bottleneck for representation.
Absolutely.
So hopefully the thing I'm trying to put together, and hopefully others are doing similar amounts in the future and whatnot, allows some of that burden to be taken up by people who are not the challenger, who are not solely focused on the dynamics of trying to be a candidate running for office. People who can just do this.
Right. So I think, to your point, I think lucky whoever is going to run this race is to have somebody like you in their corner and pre-fundraising for them, because I think that's the whole idea of like early money is like yeast, right? So Emily's list is because it allows you to get your name out there. And when we were at the precincts talking to people on election day, so many people we were able to connect with who were just going in to vote because they didn't even know there was a challenger, voted for us because they hadn't heard of us before. And I think that had I had the money and the financial support ahead of time to send out mailers, to send out do ads and targeted ads, I think who would have known, I think that we have a strong message to send to people. I think that, yes, COVID is a very unique situation, and I hope that it never happens during an election cycle ever again. But Virginia has elections every year. One of the things that I would do better next time would be to start early. So I waited because there were so many amazing local progressive candidates running last cycle. I wanted to wait until after November to announce so I could fundraise. But then when you announce in November, holidays come in. So people are more about their lives and it's more family time and stuff like that. So I think that makes it a little bit more challenging too. So my advice to this person would be to start early. And I don't know the specific laws of how early you can announce and how early you can fundraise. I think that as long as you're doing it within the legality and of FEC, I think that starting as early as possible, just so you have that early money to be able to get your name out, is just so incredibly important.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yes, that was definitely one of the things that came up. At the end of last year, I did a whole bunch of interviews without video, just informal interviews with folks, and just trying to get a sense of, like, similarly with you, what some of the stuff they faced was. And it was amazing how often money for specific time frames and purposes came up. Like, X amount of money, start of your campaign, X amount of money, end of your campaign, were some of the really the key things to zero in on. And I just kept seeing that over and over again. And that has resulted in pushing me in the direction of, like, okay, like, you gotta fundraise ahead of time for the cause you want and be ready to step up when they're ready. Right.
I think that one of the challenges that I faced is there are a lot of self-proclaimed progressives within the local Democratic Party, but I think that those are also people who have multiple vested interests and will only support like a progressive candidate, not based on values, but based on when it's politically convenient for them. And I think that was a surprise to me, because a lot of the people that I had kind of counted on to at least be advocates, if not supporters, at least be advocates of the values that they feel like are progressive, which are my values as well. I was disappointed to know that that wasn't the case, that people who are involved in the local Democratic, and this is my experience of being a part of the local Democratic committees, is that people who are in these are here to get experience, and they look further to their own political career. And I think that we have a lot of politicians who don't really give a shit about people. I think that we need more people with empathy. We need more people who are more concerned about how a run or their race or how I guess their values are going to impact the people that they will be representing, the general public, more about what is politically convenient, because that's the system as it exists. And obviously that's not going so great, because somebody as racist as Chad Peterson is a senator.
And then of course it extends nationally, and there's other states with even worse problems, but still, you gotta start where you live, and you gotta do the best you can.
Absolutely.
And that's what we're gonna do.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, thank you so much for talking to me, for sharing your story. And
thank you.
I'll get this shared with everyone, and hopefully as many people as possible can see it.
That's awesome. But can I just add one more thing? I feel like when the reason why I bring the local Democratic Party so much into my conversations, because I think there are a lot of inequities that exist within the local Democratic Party. And I think that even though they're local power, I think that there's a lot of influence that could be used for positive change as a system. And I think that, like you said, it trickles upward of where local Democratic parties do these practices, and it's part of the system that's set up, right? So I think a lot of there's a push for people to go out and vote, but I think there's a lack of information for voters to about when elections are, who is running, who's on the ballot, what values they carry. And I think that that is such a fundamental aspect of democracy. And as Democratic Party and as the local Democratic Party, I think that it is our responsibility to disseminate that information to people who wouldn't otherwise have access to it.
No, that's absolutely true. Yeah, and definitely I know they've struggled off and on with that, and it has been a continual discussion. And obviously it's come up a lot more recently with responses to, you know, the recent unrest and everything, and people like really like people in good faith saying let's try and do more, and others in less good faith saying let's do something, and how that all shakes out is really where actual progress tends to get made. And yeah, and certainly I hope that, you know, I certainly for my part hope to talk more with organizers and people and get them more coverage and exposure for their struggles in that regard, because you're absolutely right. We get so focused on like, oh, it's about these elections or like these races, and like they are important, but like it's such a spectrum of involvement and activism and difference that you can make in your community, and sometimes it's just as important as getting yourself into the committee so you can start pushing them a little bit, as it is to think about running for office or things like that. There's always ways to help. Always ways to be better.
Absolutely.
Thank
you so much.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. My apologies if it seems like I was cutting you off before. I had wrapped up what I was in my head.
No, it's totally okay. I just wanted to point that out to make sure that that's such an important aspect of, should be an important aspect of the Democratic Party in general. And I think hopefully if it's not coming top down, it can go bottom up, right?
Yeah. So, whatever we can do and however.
Right.
Exactly. Well, thank you again. I'll wrap up the recording, and